Hey guys, what's up? Today I'll be doing an album review for the band Mortal Decay with their first full-length album from 1997 titled Sickening, Erotic, Fanaticism. This originally came out on Pulverizer Records, and thankfully it was just bootleg because it was pretty rare to find, and it's a super high quality bootleg. Inserts are all the same, and you got that OG disc art. The only difference is the logo, and the coloring is a little bit darker. So it's definitely probably the highest quality fake I've ever had, which is nice to definitely own this on physical format. But anyway, Mortal Decay is a band from New Jersey, and this was their first full-length album. But before this, they were pretty well defined. They already had their feet on the ground with a couple demos out. But this was their first full-length record. And where this album is kind of split between Mortal Decay fans is people preferring the demo material or people preferring the material on the full length. I think both are pretty good, but personally I like the songs better on here because out of the 10 songs on this record, 6 out of the 10 are actually re-recordings of the stuff on their demo. And the original vocalist, Johnny, was replaced by Kelly, and they have very different styles. So the songs definitely take quite a different vibe and a bit of a different tone. But what I really like about Mortal Decay and this album in particular is they combine elements of death metal grind as well as progressive metal into their sounds. So you really get this unique take on the genre, and it just feels really refreshing by today's standards or by the standards of the 90s. It's definitely very original and very fresh material. And personally, I am a huge fan of Kelly's vocals. And like I said, I do prefer these songs to the demo, which would get me murdered by most Mortal Decay fans, but I guess that's just my take on it. He definitely has not a super guttural sound. It's more of like a yelled style of vocals with some highs, and like it feels a little bit more grindy to me. And of course, Johnny is a legend, and he came back on Forensic to do vocals, but it's really cool to see the change of vibe that Kelly brings to these songs because they're really just a completely different beast compared to the demos. And this album starts off with the song Decomposed with Nitric Acid. And that is one of the 4 original and new songs that they wrote for this album. And that is probably the strongest song on the record, I'd say. It's got some really cool vocal patterns, really good riffs. There's a lot of really memorable parts on this album where Kelly will break into like some high screams where he says some really cool lyrics. Which brings me to another thing I really like about Mortal Decay in this album is they have really neat band lyrics. Drummer Anthony Ipri wrote all the lyrics, and it's basically kind of gore mixed with like true crime. It's basically, it feels like you're watching an episode of Forensic Files, and probably the neatest thing I've ever seen in a band layout is they have like this key on the insert, and it just has a bunch of different themes like mass murder, serial killer, grave robber. And then on the songs, they have that key right before the lyrics. So it's just kind of like a cool theme that they tie in to all the material to create a unique vibe. But back to the music, I think the first 3 songs are probably the strongest on here. And that would be Decomposed with Nitric Acid, the title track, Sickening, Erotic, Fanaticism, and Revived Half Dead. Revived Half Dead is, of course, a re-recording that was on their previous demo. And that's probably the strongest example of how much this band's vibe has changed from the demos to the full length. I mean, it just sounds like a completely different song, and I prefer the version on the full length. The structure is mostly the same, but there's a couple like added guitar harmonies, and Kelly's vocal style is just really different from Johnny. There's no frog vocals. It's a lot more yelled, and there's more highs. And it definitely really changes the vibe, but I think it goes over very well. And then the fourth track on here is another original one that they wrote for this album called Meditating Through Mayhem. And that's definitely their most progressive and experimental song on the album. It starts right away with some really, really weird and dissonant harmonies. And the song just has really good build. There's a really great guitar solo near the middle and end, which ties it together very nicely. And along with like the creeping and dissonant harmonies and single note melodies, I am a big fan of Anthony's drumming on here. He does a lot of two-handed hi-hat stuff and like a lot of fills with like 6-stroke rolls, and you can tell he's definitely very influenced by a lot of fusion drummers. I think on his thanks list he even named a couple like Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, which is cool to see in a death metal setting, because the way he applies the jazz drumming to the death metal is a pretty cool take. You know, it's not quite like Lily Gruber where it's super flashy jazz and stuff like that. It's a lot more just a little bit more low key, but it's also very tasteful and it plays to the music very well. And on top of the technicality and unique fills, he is also a very strong blast beat player. While this album definitely doesn't rely on speed as its main component, there are quite a few sections that have some pretty fast blast beats. What else is on here? Apparitions, that's another re-recording from the demo. Another one of my favorite Mortal Decay songs. But I think my two favorites on here would be Decomposed with Nitric Acid and Revived Half Dead. On Revived Half Dead, the opening verse, there is this horrendous vocal distortion on the vocals. It sounds so terrible, and it like almost ruins the whole song, but it doesn't last too long. But I don't know whose idea it was to do that effect, but I can't say I'm a fan of that. But I mean, it's not a big deal. It's just something that I laugh at every time. And then throughout the B side of this album, they kind of explore a little bit of the more slowed down and even a little bit of doom influence they bring. The two songs, Opening the Graves and Colombian Necktie, probably have the most slowed down, and it's not really doomy. I mean, it's slow, but there's still like a lot of use of dissonant melodies, which keeps things very interesting. And one thing I really respect about this band and this album is it really keeps you on your toes. It's not very predictable, where a lot of times when you listen to music, not that this is a bad thing, but you can just kind of get a grasp on where the songs are building to or what's going to happen next. That's not really the case with Mortal Decay. After some listens, I'd say it's a pretty accessible album to commit to memory, but it will definitely keep you on your toes for pretty much the duration of the whole album. The only thing where I think this album lacks a little bit is the last 3 songs. They're all re-recordings of the demo version, and while they're super solid, personally, I think the album kind of ends on a little bit of a weaker note. However, there are some solid riffs on the last 3 songs. I know John Gallagher and Jason Netherton do backup vocals on Soaking in Entrails, which is a nice touch to that song. Their vocal style fits really well. But overall, this is a super solid and unique piece of brutal death metal. I really like all the elements that Mortal Decay brings to their sound, whether it be some grind elements or just some progressive and jazz style rhythms, really cool harmonies, and just a overall super refreshing take on the genre. And to top it all off, you have really cool true crime lyrics mixed with gore, but it's just done through a lens of like watching some kind of police document on a serial killer or something like that. So really cool, really neat lyrics, and just super great and enjoyable album. The runtime's pretty long. It's about 55 minutes, but it's not really a record that you're going to get bored of. You're not going to zone out listening to it, and that's something I respect about it a lot. So I'm going to give this album an 8.5 out of 10, and I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't heard it, because it's probably a standout in the genre. I know a lot of people prefer these songs on the demo, but personally I'm a fan of the full length, and I think it's just a really solid piece of music. So yeah, Check it out. Mortal Decay, Sickening, Erotic, Fanaticism. Thanks for watching.